The 2018 Kentucky Derby is approaching. Of course, it always occurs the first Saturday in May. And there were 3 Kentucky Derby points races this past weekend, and I'm going to focus on 2 of them, discuss how the races went, and some of the horses, how they did. The 3-year-old hopefuls for the Kentucky Derby this year. Before I get into these specific races, it is still early, so most the races that are going on now, the winners get about, for now, they're getting 10 points towards their bid to be one of the 20 horses in the Derby. And then that will slowly increase and then the biggest races before the Derby, the prep races, the winners get 100 for some of them, and then there's some upcoming where they get 50, and then the second and third place finishers also start to get more. I think right now they only get about 4. The winners get 10. So these races, even if you win, you're not gonna book a spot to the Derby, but they do help if you win them in that bid, because just of how the slots are determined for the horses that get into the Derby, all of the points count. And then also it's just a good opportunity to see the horses run in a competitive race. One point I would make why these races are important is because it can give the trainers flexibility in terms of selecting what races they want to run before the Derby. So they might, if a trainer feels like he has a really good horse that has a chance to win the Derby, he might have a specific schedule or a specific race that he wants to run his horse in prior to the Derby. But if his horse doesn't have enough points to get in the Derby, he might be forced to run in a specific race in a location or against other horses that he might not want to, that he might not feel is the best prep for his horse ahead of the Derby. So to get these points now, they can give the trainer flexibility in terms of scheduling. That's just something to think about with these races. And if you want the standings and the schedule, the Kentucky Derby website is pretty good at giving that. They update their leaderboard, and the top horse racing websites like DRF and Horse Racing Nation, and there's a bunch of others. I don't want to leave them out, but they all have the schedules and the points leaderboard, and it is just fun to follow for me, just to kind of the standings of it. So anyway, let's now take a look at the 2 of the 3 races from this past weekend. One was the Holy Bull, which was won by Audible, trained by Todd Pletcher, and then the second one, which I'm actually going to talk about first, was the Withers, which was won by Avery Island. So the Withers was really interesting because it was a small field, but I think looking back, it's a talented field, and maybe it could wind up having multiple horses that run the Derby. We'll see. But so as I mentioned, Avery Island was the horse that won, and he had really low odds going into this race. The 2 of the other ones that were among the favorites were Frenzy Fire, who has actually run a couple of races. He's trained by Jason Service, and some people really like him. He's, like I said, he's actually running quite a few races now. And then another one is Marconi, who's trained by Todd Pletcher. So I would recommend going back and watching this race because it's really interesting how it turned out. So Avery Island, I thought, run an awesome race, and I think he's a top contender for the Derby. He's trained by Kieran McLaughlin, and he broke out of the gate really nice. And then I loved his trip because he wasn't in the lead, but he was just that great stalking trip, right within shot of the leader, and he was just steady throughout. And then towards the end, right at the final stretch, made his move, easily put away the horse that was in the lead who drifted back, and then just ran a really nice stretch run and closed and won. And then Frenzy Fire who wound up finishing second, which is interesting. I thought ran a decent race, but I didn't love it. Like, there was nothing to love about it, but he was just solid. But he'll have to start running faster and better in both the bigger Derby prep races, and then if he does get into the Derby itself. I'm not sure at this second that Frenzy Fire is a threat to win the Derby. That could, those words come back and bite me. I'm definitely keeping an eye out on him though. Because I did, while I didn't love his race, I thought that he just ran a solid race, but I'm not sure if he was ever a threat to beat Avery Allen. But that might be, maybe give credit to Avery Allen as opposed to criticizing Frenzy Fire. So that's something to consider. So definitely, like, just keep in the back of your mind Frenzy Fire. We'll see what he does down the road. And third was Marconi, and this was a horse that I really had pegged out, that I wanted to see running this race. And I wasn't disappointed is the wrong word. He finished third. He had a terrible start out of the gate. Like, he was last right away, and that's his style. He's more of a closer, so you'd expect him to, in most races to be back a little bit. But in this race, it seemed like he was way further back than even a closer would want to be. And I think that maybe part of that was just getting out of the gate. But the thing that I really loved about Marconi, if you watched it, was he never gave up, which you like to see when a horse is, maybe if he doesn't have a bad start. But most importantly was he really showed something towards the end, and he really had that big final kick. And I think if he is able to just improve his start a little bit, and the other thing with him is this is a horse that will almost certainly like a longer distance. So as we get into the longer races, and then obviously, of course, in the Derby, the 1.25 miles, then this is a horse that will like that. So I'm definitely keeping an eye on Marconi, trained by Todd Pletcher. And one thing to consider is, and this is something I always mention, right now, I think me and most horse racing fans were kind of so focused on the Derby, but don't forget about the Belmont. And if you think about last year, what happened, but the Belmont was won by Tapwrit, who was trained by Todd Pletcher. So a horse like Marconi, who might like that extra distance, he could be a threat to win the Belmont, even if he's not a threat to win the Derby. So that's just kind of something to put into the back of your mind. So that was the Withered. So we had Avery Island first, Frenzy Fire second, and Marconi third. And they each are kind of interesting horses all to themselves. And I think they're all horses that are worth paying attention to moving forward. Then the second of the three races, and the one that I really want to talk about, was the Holy Bull. This was this race was won by Audible, and I loved Audible in this race. I really did. This is another one that's actually trained by Todd Pletcher again, and I loved everything about his race in this. He was kind of somewhat similar to Avery Allen in that he was right at the he wasn't on the lead, but he was right in contention for the lead from the start. And then as those kind of speed horses at the beginning start to fade back as you get towards the end, then Audible just, boom, that's when he kind of accelerated. And he just put away all the other horses. And the horse that wound up finishing second, Free Drop Billy, who was an accomplished horse so far in his own right, like, they were kind of neck and neck towards this top of the stretch, and Audible really put him away. And for me, that says a lot, because I actually really like Free Drop Billy. And so for Audible to separate himself, if you go back and watch that race, for Audible to separate himself from Free Drop Billy, it'd be one thing if he separated himself from like a 30-1, just a long shot that's probably not to mean the Derby. But Free Drop Billy, was one of the more well-known 2-year-olds, and I think is still a threat in this Derby season. And Audible really kind of had his way with him. So I'm keeping a very close eye on Audible moving forward. And then Free Drop Billy as well. Like, this is a horse that I've mentioned a lot, and I'm still going to, because, okay, yeah, he kind of got beat by Audible, but at the same time, he ran a nice race and he was able to put the rest of the field away. We're not sure how good the rest of the field is, but regardless, he still ran nice. And it's so Free Drop Billy is another one that I'm not forgetting about, and he could be similar to, as I mentioned with Marconi, he could be one to consider for the Belmont too. Again, it's a little early for that, but so definitely the Holy Bull, Audible, that's a huge win. And if he runs like that again in one of these bigger, I think maybe the Florida Derby would be a potential for him, but we'll see. I don't know if it's been announced yet. There's so many though, like there's so many of these Kentucky. I think it's called the Kentucky Derby Championship Series. I'm pretty sure there's so many races that there's so many options. So whatever race it is that he runs next, it's definitely gonna be worth looking at. So this was a big weekend, I thought, and I don't want to ignore the third race. But just for purposes of this video, I'm just focusing on the Withers and the Holy Bull. So again, just to recap, Withers, Avery Allen, great race, but the first, second, and third, all three of them are horses to keep an eye out for. And then the Holy Bull, great run by Audible, and then Free Drop Billy continues to kind of stay around, and we'll see if he can improve, and if he does, he'll be a serious threat. So thanks for watching. We have, I believe it's the Sam F. Davis. Should double check that, but I think that's the race upcoming this weekend. And then, as I mentioned, pretty quickly it turns into the bigger races where they get 50 and then ultimately 100 points towards their Derby tally. And then in a couple months it'll be the Derby. So again, thanks for watching. And if you didn't get a chance to watch these races live, I definitely recommend to go online and check them out, because sometimes you really get a sense of a horse just by, even if it's a replay. I prefer to watch it live, but even on the replay you can kind of see how they do and just get a feel for the running style and how they react to the race when it's live. So thanks again, and enjoy the races coming up.